In November 1943, Adolf Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 51, a document written in the verbose, dramatic language he favored, but carrying consequences of staggering proportions. The Allies would invade Western Europe. This was not speculation. This was certainty. When they landed, and the Führer used the word when, not if, they would attempt to establish a foothold from which they could launch liberation campaigns eastward toward the German heartland. Hitler's solution was characteristically grandiose: the Atlantic Wall, a coastal fortification stretching from Norway to Spain, a concrete and steel fortress that would annihilate any amphibious assault and throw the invaders back into the sea. The problem was that no one, not Hitler, not his generals, not even the Allies themselves with certainty, knew where the invasion would actually occur. A look at a map of Western Europe reveals the mathematical dilemma. The English Channel narrows as it approaches the French coast. The shortest distance, Dover to Pas-de-Calais, is only 21 miles. From there, German forces could roll eastward toward the Rhine in days. From there, supply lines would be short, air cover would be continuous, and any beachhead established by the Allies could be contained and destroyed. On the other hand, Normandy was farther, beaches were fewer, terrain was more complex, and port facilities were inadequate. By every rational military standard, Pas-de-Calais was where the Allies would attack. But what if German rationality itself became a weapon against them? The conspiracy of lies. In December 1943, a small group of British military officers and intelligence specialists began work on a deception plan so audacious, so encompassing in scope, that it would eventually fool not just German field commanders but Hitler himself. The operation had a codename drawn from a Winston Churchill quote, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." The overall plan was called Operation Bodyguard. Within it sat Operation Fortitude, the deception within the deception, the lie that would save thousands of Allied lives. The architects were, at first, two men: Noel Wild, head of Ops B at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, and John Bevan from the London Controlling Section. They were joined in January 1944 by Colonel David Strangeways, Montgomery's deception officer, a man with the rare combination of military imagination and ruthless attention to detail. Together, they would create something unprecedented in the history of warfare: a phantom army that did not exist, commanded by a general who would never lead them into battle, positioned in camps that were facades, equipped with weapons that were inflatables. The core of Fortitude consisted of two complementary deceptions, designated Fortitude North and Fortitude South. Fortitude North would convince the Germans that an invasion of Norway was imminent, that Scottish Highland positions in Edinburgh harbored invasion craft and assault divisions ready to strike across the North Sea. This was the feint to the feint, designed to draw German reinforcements northward, away from France. Fortitude South was the main effort. It would convince Hitler that an invasion of the Pas-de-Calais was coming, and that it would be led by one of the most feared generals in the world, George S. Patton. It was brilliant, not because it was subtle, but because it was not subtle. It was brilliant because it used the enemy's own logic against them: the Ghost Army. In January 1944, the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, was activated at an innocuous location in southeast England. FUSAG did not exist, but it was very, very real. The Phantom Army consisted of 11 divisions, roughly 150,000 imaginary men. They had camps, complete with empty tents, supply depots with no supplies, and motor pools with vehicles that arrived and departed on carefully timed schedules designed to be observed by German reconnaissance aircraft. Engineers, many of them stage builders from Shepperton Studios, constructed false buildings, fake fuel dumps, phony signal stations. In Folkestone Harbor, the Allies assembled 255 dummy landing craft, not wooden mock-ups, but carefully designed craft made of lashed steel drums and wooden frames covered with canvas, detailed enough to be identified as landing craft from 3,000 feet altitude, but worthless below 1,500 feet. On airfields near Dover, the Allies parked dummy aircraft wooden frames covered in fabric that bore a passing resemblance to Spitfires and B-17 seconds from a distance. When dusk fell, teams of soldiers with car headlamps would drag lights across the runways, creating the impression of aircraft moving in darkness, aircraft taking off for night missions. Bases operating around the clock. It was theater. It was absurd. And it worked. But the physical deception was only the beginning. The Radio Symphony, the 3,103rd Signal Battalion of the United States Army, and the 3,118th Signal Service Group of the British Army faced an unusual problem. They had to create radio traffic that sounded exactly like an army preparing for invasion. The problem was that most of them had never heard real invasion traffic. So they recorded military exercise broadcasts on new magnetic wire recorders, then used those recordings as templates to fabricate messages perfectly authentic-sounding radio chatter about divisional movements, supply requests, weather observations, all the mundane communications that armies generate constantly. These signals were broadcast on frequencies that German radio operators monitored constantly. The Germans heard what they expected to hear: an enormous force, gathering, organizing, preparing. The radio traffic painted a picture of an army ready to assault the Pas-de-Calais region within weeks. But there was another layer. Atop the radio deception sat Operation Quicksilver, a secondary deception involving fake radar signals generated by special equipment positioned along the south coast of England. These signals, when received and interpreted by German radar operators, created the illusion of massive shipping movements in the Channel, all directed toward the Pas-de-Calais. And above all of this sat the human deception, a network of double agents who would convince the German High Command that they had infiltrated the Allies' invasion, planning with accuracy that would have seemed like fantasy had it been fiction. The Invisible Army, Agent Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia. He was a Spanish businessman, an anti-fascist who despised Hitler, and who would become one of the most important intelligence assets of World War II. To the Germans, he was known as Arabelle, and later given the code name Garbo. To British intelligence, he was the most reliable spy in the entire German network, because he was actually British intelligence. The brilliance of Garbo was not that he fed false information to the Germans, though he did that superbly. The brilliance was that he had created an entire fictional intelligence network beneath him. Garbo didn't just send reports, he sent reports about reports. Intelligence gathered by agents who didn't exist, verified through a network of sub-agents who existed only in the minds of German intelligence officers. He invented 27 imaginary agents, each with their own code names, their own areas of responsibility, their own credibilities and blind spots. When German intelligence received information from Garbo that seemed to contradict intelligence from another source, they didn't dismiss Garbo. They checked the reliability of the other source. Garbo had become the anchor point of German intelligence on the invasion. And Garbo was feeding them lies. Beautiful, elaborate, perfectly constructed lies. In the months before D-Day, Garbo's reports consistently reinforced a single message. The Allies were massing in southeast England with overwhelming force, far exceeding the force necessary for a single invasion. This could only mean one thing: the invasion would come in two phases. The first phase, perhaps a secondary assault, might come at Normandy. But the main blow, the real invasion, would come at Pas-de-Calais, launched by Fusag under General Patton. This made sense. This aligned with German expectations. This confirmed what German officers already believed. Most dangerously, Garbo's reports came at critical moments. When the Allies wanted the Germans to fear a second invasion, Garbo sent urgent messages. When the Germans needed reassurance that their strategic assumptions were correct, Garbo provided it. And because Garbo had been correct so many times on so many matters, the Allies had carefully arranged for real information to reach the Germans through Garbo's network. building his credibility. The Germans trusted him completely. The Germans were so impressed with Garbo that they awarded him the Iron Cross for his extraordinary services to the Third Reich. He was wearing a British MBE when the war ended. The man who wasn't there. In late May 1944, Australian actor M.E. Clifton James, who bore a remarkable resemblance to British General Bernard Montgomery, was sent on a carefully choreographed tour of Gibraltar and North Africa. The purpose was singular: to convince the Germans that Montgomery was not in England, and therefore the invasion could not be imminent. If Monty was in North Africa, the thinking went, the invasion would be delayed by weeks. The Germans intercepted intelligence about his movements. They confirmed through various channels that Montgomery had been seen in Cairo, in Alexandria, that he was consulting with Middle Eastern commanders. One German intelligence officer even reported personally observing the general. The man they saw was an actor. The real Montgomery was preparing the invasion from his headquarters in southern England. The diversions within diversions. In early June 1944, with the real invasion only days away, the Allies launched Operation Titanic, the dropping of hundreds of dummy parachutists over the Caen area west of Normandy. These weren't simple cloth dummies. Many were equipped with noisemakers, loudspeakers, and explosives. They were dropped alongside real SAS commandos who activated sound equipment that simulated a full airborne assault. The Germans heard gunfire, explosions, organized military action. They concluded that a major airborne landing was underway in the Caen area, far from where the actual airborne assault was occurring, near Utah and Sword Beaches. German reserves that might have been sent to contain a real airborne assault were held back to contain a phantom threat. Meanwhile, RAF bombers conducted a bombing campaign that doubled down on Pas-de-Calais while also attacking Normandy. But the tonnage was heavily weighted toward Calais, the region where the real invasion was supposed to come. German commanders noted the bombing patterns and concluded that they confirmed their expectations. The Allies were isolating and weakening Pas-de-Calais in preparation for the main assault there. On the night of June 5th, RAF aircraft dropped strips of aluminum foil, a material codenamed window, across the channel. The foil reflected radar signals, creating the illusion of a massive convoy heading not toward Normandy, but toward Pas-de-Calais. German radar operators watched their screens as what appeared to be thousands of aircraft and ships moved toward the wrong beach. Nothing was accidental. Nothing was spontaneous. Every piece of the deception was choreographed, tested, and synchronized. The longest day. The moment of truth. June 5th, 1944. Evening. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood in his quarters at La Roche-Guyon Castle, his command post in Normandy, and made a decision. The weather was foul. A storm had been lashing the English Channel for days. Allied meteorologists said it would clear in 24 hours. German meteorologists said it would persist for at least a week. German meteorologists had been wrong before, but how wrong could they be? Rommel decided to drive to Germany. His wife's birthday was coming up on June 6th. Hitler was unreachable most of the time, but if Rommel could secure a personal audience, he might convince the Führer to release the Panzer divisions from strategic reserve. These divisions were the only real counterattack force Germany possessed. Under Hitler's personal control, locked away from Rommel's direct command, they were useless. But if Rommel could get Hitler's ear, he might change the strategic situation entirely. On June 5th, Rommel drove west, leaving his command post in the hands of his chief of staff, Colonel Hans Speidel. At the same moment, Hitler slept. The Führer had been awake late into the night, reviewing intelligence reports, all of which pointed to the same conclusion. The invasion would not come soon, and when it did, it would come at Pas-de-Calais. There was no reason to stay awake. Hitler retired to his bed and ordered his staff not to disturb him unless the situation fundamentally changed. At Pas-de-Calais, General Hans von Salmuth, commander of the German 15th Army, reviewed his defensive positions. His army was the strongest German force in France, 19 divisions, fresh troops, well supplied. They were positioned perfectly to repel an invasion at Pas-de-Calais. But Normandy, 50 miles to the southwest, was held by General Friedrich Dollmann's 7th Army, a force that was under strength, poorly equipped, many units filled with conscripts from the Soviet Union, the Ostbataillionen, men who had no loyalty to Germany and every reason to desert if the opportunity arose. Salmuth did not question why Pas-de-Calais was so heavily defended and Normandy so lightly held. The logic was obvious. Pas-de-Calais was where the Allies would come. Midnight. The invasion begins. At 12:15 a.m. on June 6th, the first of 822 transport aircraft carrying the 101st Airborne Division crossed the coast of Normandy. They were followed by additional waves of paratroopers. The sky filled with aircraft, so many that some German observers later said it looked like snow falling upward. But these aircraft were over Normandy, and the German High Command at first believed them to be a diversion. At 3 a.m., the naval bombardment began. Battleships and cruisers offshore opened fire on German positions. The sound was apocalyptic, the concussion of thousands of artillery shells arriving simultaneously. At Omaha Beach, the bombardment continued for 40 minutes, a hammering so intense that some German observers believed it would be impossible to land anywhere along the coast that day. The defenses must surely be destroyed. Nothing could survive such a barrage. But at Pas-de-Calais, the bombardment was lighter. As dawn approached, German officers at Calais noted that while they heard explosions from the south, the bombardment in their sector was considerably less intense. Many concluded this confirmed what they already believed. Normandy was the diversionary assault. The main bombardment would come at Pas-de-Calais, where the main invasion was preparing to launch. 6 a.m. This is day. The BBC broadcast a single phrase. This is D-Day. This is the day. The coded message prepared months in advance was a signal to the French resistance that the invasion was underway. Across France, saboteurs who had been waiting for this moment began cutting rail lines, destroying power stations, assassinating German collaborators. In Brittany, resistance fighters blocked roads. In the Loire Valley, they derailed supply trains. In Paris, assassination teams began the systematic elimination of German headquarters personnel. At the Berghof, Hitler's personal residence in the Bavarian Alps, the Führer slept. His staff had strict orders not to wake him. Reports of airborne landings had come in, yes, but these were obviously diversionary. The real invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais. Wait for more information. Let the situation clarify. Wake the Führer with confirmed intelligence, not rumors. 9 a.m. The deception holds. At German Army Group B headquarters, Rommel's chief of staff, Colonel Speidel, was receiving increasingly alarmed reports from Normandy. The invasion was not a feint. The scale of the assault was enormous. Hundreds of landing craft, thousands of soldiers, massive air support. But still, Speidel hesitated. Still, the High Command hesitated. This could be the preliminary assault. The real invasion was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. Did we not have perfect intelligence confirming this from our best sources? Near Caen, in Normandy, the 21st Panzer Division, commanded by General Edgar Feuchtinger, had received orders to move toward the beaches and counter the invasion. But Feuchtinger needed permission from Rommel's headquarters, and Rommel was not there. Radio messages were sent requesting authorization. Hours passed. The division received contradictory orders from different headquarters. Move forward. Hold position. Move forward. By the time the 21st Panzer committed to battle, precious hours had been lost. The invasion was establishing a bridgehead that German armor could no longer contain. Noon, Hitler wakes up. At approximately 10 a.m. German time, Hitler's staff finally convinced him to wake. The Führer was told of the invasion. His response was immediate. This was a feint. The real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. Do not commit the Central Reserves. Do not release the Panzer divisions. Normandy was a distraction. The main battle would come elsewhere. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, requested permission to move 2 Panzer divisions, the 12th SS Panzer and Panzer Lehr toward Normandy, to contain the beachhead. Hitler refused. These divisions were his strategic reserve. They would be held in position until the Pas-de-Calais situation clarified. It was noon before Hitler released even 2 divisions. It was evening before they were engaged in combat. By then, the Allies had landed 156,000 troops on 5 beaches and secured a continuous beachhead that no German counterattack could dislodge. The Phantom Army strikes again. At 4 p.m. on June 6th, as German commanders were desperately trying to understand what was happening in Normandy, British intelligence transmitted a message to German High Command through their intelligence channels. The message was ostensibly from Garbo and confirmed what German officers feared. The Normandy invasion was a diversion. Foussag was still in England, still preparing for the real invasion at Pas-de-Calais. The effect was electric. German High Command, which had been wavering, was suddenly certain again. Pas-de-Calais was the true target. Normandy was the feint. Every piece of available intelligence confirmed this radio intercepts, Garbo's network, the bombing pattern, the scale and location of airdrops. That night, Hitler ordered the 15th Army to remain in position at Pas-de-Calais. June 7 to 15. The crisis of doubt. For a week after D-Day, the deception held absolutely. German High Command, at every level, believed that the main invasion was still coming, but cracks began to form. On June 7th, General Dahlmann, commanding the German 7th Army in Normandy, reported that the scale of the invasion seemed enormous. Could this be the main invasion, not a secondary one? The response from higher headquarters was swift. No, the intelligence is clear. Pas-de-Calais remains the primary target. On June 8th, a German general in Normandy sent an urgent message requesting reinforcements. The bridgehead was expanding. Without reinforcements, the 7th Army would not be able to contain it. Permission for reinforcements was denied. The 15th Army would not move from Pas-de-Calais. Surely the American General Patton was still planning his assault on Calais. On June 10th, the first serious cracks appeared. German intelligence officers began to question their assumptions. The invasion was now 6 days old. No second invasion at Pas-de-Calais had materialized, but Field Marshal von Rundstedt continued to believe. He sent a radio message to Hitler, requesting permission to consolidate the Normandy front and prepare for the inevitable assault at Pas-de-Calais. Hitler denied the request. June 15 to 20. The moment of truth. By June 15th, 2 weeks after D-Day, the situation in Normandy was critical. The German 7th Army was being pushed back. Cherbourg was surrounded. The Allies were breakout out of their beachhead in multiple locations. And still, Hitler refused to move significant forces from Pas-de-Calais. One more invasion would come there. One more attempt by the Allies. It had to. On June 17th, Hitler met with Rommel and von Rundstedt at his headquarters near Margeval. The meeting was tense. Rommel warned that the German position was becoming untenable. The Allies had complete air superiority. German armor was being destroyed by air attack faster than it could be replaced. The only solution was to withdraw the German forces behind the Seine and establish a new defensive line where Allied air power would be less effective. Hitler refused. "You must believe in the power of German will," Hitler said. "We will hold our ground. We will throw the Allies back into the sea." Rommel left the meeting broken. He told his staff that the war was lost. But still, Hitler did not commit his reserves at Pas-de-Calais. June 25 to 30. The recognition. By the end of June, the deception was finally becoming obvious, even to German officers who had desperately wanted to believe it. There was no second invasion. There was no Foussag. General Patton was not commanding phantom divisions. On June 25th, German intelligence issued a report acknowledging that while deception had been attempted, the report used the word Maskirovka military deception. The evidence suggested the Allies had committed their main force to Normandy. This was not a sideshow. This was the invasion. But by then, it was far too late. July 1 to 31. The bitter realization. For another full week until July 1st, Hitler refused to allow the 15th Army to abandon Pas-de-Calais and move to Normandy. The Allied deception was so successful that even after the Allies had expanded their beachhead to over 100 miles wide and pushed 20 miles inland, Hitler still believed that a second invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais. In the first week of July, German intelligence finally issued an unambiguous assessment. The invasion site was Normandy. There would be no second invasion at Pas-de-Calais. The 15th Army could be released to reinforce Normandy. But even this assessment came with a caveat. There remained a possibility that a diversionary assault might be attempted at Pas-de-Calais to draw German forces away from Normandy. The deception extended even into the moment when the Germans finally realized the deception. By July 15th, the 15th Army began moving toward Normandy. But the movement was slow, disrupted by Allied air attacks, harassed by the French resistance, delayed by the destruction of rail infrastructure, and by then, the Normandy beachhead was unassailable. The Allies had landed over 850,000 troops. They controlled airspace. They held the initiative. German forces were being pushed back steadily. The officers, who knew too late. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the 24 hours before the invasion. Rommel never forgave himself for being absent on D-Day. Before he left Normandy for Germany on June 5th, he had written a letter to his wife expressing his anxiety about the invasion. "The 24 hours before the invasion begins will be crucial," he wrote. "They are the longest hours of my life." But Rommel had been so confident that the invasion would not come during the storm, that he felt secure in taking a few days for himself to celebrate his wife's birthday, to visit Hitler, to try to secure control of the panzer divisions. When Rommel learned that the invasion had begun while he was en route to Germany, he was devastated. He immediately turned his car around and raced back to Normandy, but by the time he arrived at his command post, he already understood the truth. The invasion had achieved tactical surprise through brilliant deception. The Allies had achieved the one thing German defense could not overcome: the element of surprise, combined with complete Allied air superiority. Rommel spent the rest of the war trying to convince Hitler that the war was lost, that the only rational course was to negotiate peace with the Western Allies. This campaign of defeatism contributed to Hitler's suspicion of Rommel, suspicion that ultimately led to Rommel's forced suicide after the July 20th assassination attempt on Hitler. Rommel died on the 14th of October 1944, his promise unfulfilled. The man who should have been defending Normandy against the invasion died before the Allies even broke out of Normandy. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt: "What shall I do? They won't listen to me." Von Rundstedt, the senior German commander in the West, was at his headquarters far from Normandy when the invasion began. He received reports of the landings and, within hours, realized that this was the main Allied assault. He requested permission to move the reserve panzer divisions from Pas-de-Calais toward Normandy to contain the beachhead. Hitler refused. For 6 days, von Rundstedt made the same request. For 6 days, Hitler refused. The Führer does not believe. The messages from OKW stated that this is the main invasion. By June 10th, von Rundstedt was in open rebellion against the strategic situation, if not against Hitler directly. In a radio message to Hitler, he essentially conceded that the war was lost. The Allies had achieved air superiority that made large-scale German operations impossible. The only solution was to establish defensive lines that could not be outflanked by airmobile operations. Hitler's response was to ask von Rundstedt what he proposed to do. In a moment of exhausted clarity, von Rundstedt replied, "Make peace, you fool." The statement was reported to Hitler, who fired von Rundstedt on July 1st. Von Rundstedt was temporarily assigned to administer the court of honor that examined German officers suspected of involvement in the July 20th assassination attempt on Hitler, a duty that particularly offended von Rundstedt, who was sympathetic to the conspirators but unable to help them. Von Rundstedt survived the war, lived until 1953, and spent his final years writing memoirs that tried to explain how the greatest military force in Europe had been defeated by a combination of Allied deception and his own inability to override Hitler's strategic decisions. General Friedrich Dollmann, the 7th Army commander, who did not survive the reckoning. Dollmann, commanding the 7th Army defending Normandy, understood within hours of the landings that the Allies had committed their main force to his sector. He requested reinforcements desperately. He sent urgent messages to Army Group B asking for reserves. He warned that without reinforcements, the 7th Army would not be able to contain the beachhead. His requests were consistently denied. The 15th Army would not move. Pas-de-Calais remained the priority. Dollmann watched helplessly as his army was ground down by superior Allied forces. Cherbourg fell. Normandy expanded daily. The situation became hopeless. On June 28th, Dollmann suffered a fatal heart attack at his command post. Some historians believe it was brought on by the stress of commanding an army that was being sacrificed to a strategic delusion. Others believe, without evidence but with a certain dark logic, that it was not a heart attack at all, but suicide, a choice to exit a situation that had become unbearable. In either case, Dollmann died, never knowing that his pleas for reinforcements were being denied, because the High Command believed, until too late, that his battle was a feint designed to draw German forces away from the real invasion at Pas-de-Calais. General Hans von Salmuth, the defender of the empty coast. Von Salmuth commanded the 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais. He received no invaded landings in his sector. His army remained in full strength through June, through July, and well into August. The 15th Army, the most powerful German formation in France, was literally held in place by an invisible army, a phantom force that never attacked, never assaulted, never attempted to land. Von Salmuth followed orders. He remained at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that never came. The 15th Army sat idle while the battles in Normandy raged 50 miles away. By the time the army was finally released to reinforce Normandy in late July, the German cause in Normandy was already lost. Von Salmuth was captured by the Allies in 1945 and survived the war. He spent his post-war years writing accounts of his command, struggling to explain how an army of 150,000 men under his command could have played no role in the one battle that decided the fate of Western Europe. Timeline of deception and recognition. October 1943. Field Marshal von Rundstedt becomes convinced that Pas-de-Calais is the invasion target. Sends reports to OKW, confirming this assessment. November 1943. Hitler issues Führer Directive No. 51, warning of invasion. December 1943. February 1944. Operation Fortitude, planning completed. FUSAG is activated as fictional army. Radio deception begins. March 1944. First Garbo reports reach German High Command, confirming Pas-de-Calais as target. Garbo's reliability is established through a network of 27 imaginary subagents. April-May 1944. Physical deception elements reach full operational status. Dummy landing craft completed in Folkestone Harbor. Inflatable tanks positioned in Kent. Fake airfields operational. The 25th of May 1944, Garbo reports to German intelligence, "It is my opinion that because of the strong readiness of the military troops in Southeast and East England, and because they are not taking part in operations, the ones they do take part in are diversion maneuvers, with the purpose to draw attention to them, and therefore to strike on a completely different location." This message directly influences Hitler's decision not to commit reserves on D-Day. The 5th of June 1944. Field Marshal Rommel departs Normandy for Germany, believing the invasion will not come during the storm. The 6th of June 1944, 12:15 a.m. Airborne landings begin in Normandy. The 6th of June 1944, 3 a.m. Naval bombardment begins. German High Command interprets it as preliminary bombardment for a secondary assault. The 6th of June 1944. 9 a.m. Hitler declares the landings a feint. Pas-de-Calais remains the primary target. Panzer reserves are not released. The 6th of June, 1944, 4 p.m. Garbo reports again. The Normandy landings are a diversion. The main invasion is still coming at Pas-de-Calais. The 6th of June, 1944, midnight. 156,000 Allied troops have landed on 5 beaches. German High Command remains convinced the main invasion is still coming. June 7 to 10, 1944. German field commanders in Normandy desperately request reinforcements. Requests are denied. Pas-de-Calais remains the priority. The 15th of June, 1944. The deception is still holding. The 15th Army has not moved. The invasion is 9 days old. The 17th of June, 1944. Hitler meets with Rommel and von Rundstedt. Rommel warns the war is lost. Hitler refuses to change strategy. Still no commitment of reserves to Normandy. The 25th of June, 1944. German intelligence finally acknowledges that deception has been attempted and that the main invasion appears to be in Normandy, not Pas-de-Calais. The 28th of June, 1944. General Dolman, commanding the 7th Army in Normandy, dies, probably suicide, possibly heart attack. The 1st of July, 1944. Hitler finally orders the 15th Army to abandon Pas-de-Calais and move toward Normandy. Von Rundstedt is relieved of command for his defeatism. The 15th of July, 1944. The 15th Army begins moving to Normandy, but the movement is slow and disrupted by Allied air power. The 28th of July, 1944. After 52 days, the deception is finally completely dissolved. German intelligence definitively confirms that no second invasion will come at Pas-de-Calais. August 1944. The 15th Army's divisions, finally committed to Normandy, are consumed in the fighting around the Falaise pocket. Many are surrounded and destroyed. Intercepted messages. Garbo message to German High Command, the 5th of June 1944. Translated from German intercepts. Appreciate your recent instructions. Based on the composition of the forces, the location of the armies, the supply position, and the concentration of air forces, I am convinced of an imminent invasion and that it will take place in the area of Dover to be followed at a later date by a second invasion of far greater importance in the region of the Pas-de-Calais. This second phase will be launched with the object of establishing a more lasting lodgment by which the final conquest of the continent can be achieved. Impact. This single message, received by German High Command hours before the Normandy landings, directly shaped Hitler's strategic response. It convinced him that Normandy was preliminary to a larger invasion at Pas-de-Calais. Von Rundstedt message to Hitler, the 10th of June, 1944. From German War Diary, OB West. Normandy is the main point of attack. No major operations have been observed on the Pas-de-Calais front. However, strategic reserves remain held under Hitler's personal control. Request authority to commit reserves to contain the beachhead before the situation becomes critical. Response. Rejected. The Führer believes the main invasion is still coming. Wait. Von Rundstedt. Responding to Hitler's question, what should I do? The 15th of June, 1944. From German officer memoirs. Make peace, you fool. Impact. This statement, reported to Hitler, led to von Rundstedt's removal from command. It also revealed the desperation of Germany's most senior military commander, a man who had conquered France in 1940 and was now helpless to defend it because Hitler refused to grant him the forces he needed. German intelligence assessment. The 25th of June 1944. From Wehrmacht Intelligence Summary. Recent Allied activity indicates that deception operations may have been conducted with respect to the location and scale of the invasion. The massive nature of the Normandy landings and the absence of any assault on Pas-de-Calais suggest that the Normandy landings represent the main invasion effort. However, The possibility remains that a secondary landing may still be attempted in the Pas-de-Calais sector to exploit success in Normandy. Impact. Even as German intelligence finally recognized the deception, they couldn't bring themselves to completely dismiss the possibility of a second invasion. The deception was so successful that even in the moment of recognition, the Germans hedged their bets. Consequences. The human cost. The success of Operation Fortitude in delaying German reinforcements to Normandy is estimated to have saved between 10,000 and 30,000 Allied lives, lives that would have been lost had the German 15th Army been committed to Normandy on June 6th, instead of being held in place at Pas-de-Calais until July. The failure of German commanders to overcome the deception and redirect forces to the main battle in time is estimated to have cost Germany the war not alone, but as a decisive factor. Had German reserves been available to counterattack the beachhead in the first 48 hours, the Normandy landings might have been contained or driven back into the sea. History might have been very different. Instead, the Allies established a beachhead that expanded daily. Within a week, over 500,000 troops had landed. Within 2 weeks, over 1 million. Within a month, the Allies had liberated Cherbourg, broken out of the bocage country of Normandy, and were preparing the drive toward Paris and the Seine. The strategic failure. The fundamental failure was not that German officers were stupid or incompetent. Many of them were brilliant. The failure was that Hitler, convinced that Pas-de-Calais was the target, would not release his strategic reserves to field commanders who were facing reality on the ground. When Rommel and von Rundstedt made their case for committing reserves, they were not arguing for a guess or a hunch. They were arguing based on actual battle conditions. They could see the Allies landing. They could count the ships. They could measure the scale of the assault. They knew from the fighting what they were up against. And they were denied the forces they needed because Hitler, sitting in Berlin and the Berghof, insisted on believing a deception plan that he had no direct way to verify or refute. The deception was brilliant. But what made it work was not the brilliance of the deception alone. What made it work was the fact that Hitler was psychologically committed to believing that Pas-de-Calais was the target. He had invested his personal prestige and strategic planning in defending Pas-de-Calais. To admit that the invasion was at Normandy would be to admit a massive intelligence failure. It would be to admit that his entire strategic understanding of where the Allies would attack had been wrong. So he refused to admit it, even as the evidence accumulated. He told his generals to wait. He said the main invasion was still coming. He held Pas-de-Calais in iron discipline, guarded by 19 divisions that never fired a shot in anger, while Normandy bled. The epilogue. What the Germans never knew, the Germans never fully understood the extent of the deception. They eventually realized that Garbeau's reports, after June 6th, claiming that Normandy was a diversionary assault and the main invasion was still coming, were false. But they never completely grasped the audacity of Operation Fortitude, the fact that there had never been a first U.S. Army group, that Patton had never been poised to attack Pas-de-Calais, that an entire phantom army had been invented, maintained, and sustained as a fiction for 8 months. After the war, German officers read about Führer, about the dummy landing craft, about the inflatable tanks. Many expressed a kind of rueful admiration for the audacity of it. But by then, the war was over. France was liberated, Germany was divided, and millions were dead. Operation Fortitude stands as one of the most successful deception operations in military history. British intelligence analysts estimate that the deception saved between 10,000 and 30,000 Allied lives, though some scholars believe the number is higher. The deception demonstrated that intelligence, properly executed, could be as decisive as firepower. A lie, if believed, could achieve the same strategic effect as a military victory. The Allies went on to win the war in Europe. Germany surrendered unconditionally on the 7th of May, 1945, and the deception that began with phantom armies and false radio traffic in early 1944 played a central role in that victory. The German officers who realized too late that Normandy was the real invasion, Rommel, von Rundstedt-Dahlmann, von Salmuth, never received the reinforcements they needed because Hitler could not bring himself to believe that the Allies had fooled him. And in that refusal to believe, in that insistence on maintaining a strategic fiction in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary, the German High Command lost not just a battle, but the war itself. There was one German officer who, years after the war, in interviews and memoirs, tried to explain what had happened. He was one of Rommel's subordinate commanders, a man who had fought in Normandy and lived to see the liberation of France from the German perspective. When asked why the Germans had not reinforced Normandy, why they had left Pas-de-Calais defended when it was obvious that the main invasion was at Normandy, he gave an answer that summarized the entire tragedy. "We knew," he said. "We knew by June 10th. We knew by June 15th for certain. But knowing and being allowed to act are two different things. When you tell your supreme commander that he has been deceived, that his entire strategic understanding is wrong, that the intelligence he trusted most is false, you are not just correcting a military error. You are challenging his judgment, his authority, his vision for how the war should be fought." He paused, looking back across the decades at the ghosts of 1944. "And so we waited. We held Pas-de-Calais. We watched Normandy expand. And we told ourselves that surely the Führer knew something we did not. Surely there was wisdom in higher councils that we, mere field commanders, could not understand. There was not. There was only the refusal of a dictator to admit that he had been fooled. And that refusal changed the course of history."